Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Chris Kirk, the General Manager here in South Australia for Stone and Chalk, and today it's my absolute privilege to moderate a brilliant session, which is the third in a series Stone and Chalk has been running called the Futurist Here series. Today's topic will be exploring extended reality, and we've got a really interesting group of entrepreneurs who will be putting forward, as well as a renowned futurist, Rocky Scopelliti. Rocky, thank you for joining us again, and I'll introduce you in a second, mate. It's been fantastic to have such a great response for this event. It clocked up about 150 online registrations, which is brilliant, and we're joined here by a live audience in South Australia as well, which is very COVID-free and fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off today's event. Just some quick housekeeping. So for everyone that's online, do put your questions into the chat section. We'll make sure we hold about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for as many questions as possible. And I know Anton and Ingo want to have as much conversation as possible. And for those in the room, we'll just pass around a microphone. If you can speak into the microphone, that would be fantastic. So without further ado, I will kick off today by introducing Rocky, who will give you an overview as to extended reality and also look at some of the trends that are coming up over the next 10 years that are likely to play out in this space. For those of you who haven't met Rocky, we're absolutely privileged to have him on board. Rocky's work has been featured at the World Economic Forum. He's regularly in the news. In his spare time, he actually leads Optus's Industry 4.0 Centre. And he's actually written a book on this space as well, looking at the convergence of technology and the role that particularly millennials will play. So really well suited to today's conversation. Rocky, over to you, mate. Look forward to sharing these insights. This component will go for about 10 minutes, and then I'll introduce the panelists and we'll have a conversation with both Anton and Ingo. Thanks, Rocky.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you today. I'm just going to, there we go. So the topics for today that I'm going to talk about really cover the extensive research I conducted over the months of January through to April this year, looking at the question of how do Australian executives feel about the decade ahead. Now, I've augmented that also with some really important insights from emerging think tanks around the world. And so we're going to talk about these sort of these areas. And of course, it's all sort of encapsulated within the book that I've just published, Australia 2030, Where the Bloody Hell Are We? It's a fascinating question, and I'm sure it's one that's been on everyone's mind. Okay, let's kick off with, firstly, what are the technologies that we believe are going to have the most or least disruptive impact when it comes to those of the fourth industrial revolution. Now, I'll bring your attention to the chart on the right-hand side here, particularly the bar in black. And what I would like to sort of highlight here is that the common denominator in all of those top 5 technologies and beyond is data. And so it's so profoundly important that we think about this from a data-first perspective, because when it comes to transformations, many organisations are yet to really transform their data and analytics capabilities. Now, when it comes to virtual and augmented reality, that ranked about 8th in the pecking order, and I'll explain some developments which I think are going to accelerate that over the coming decade. Now, this decade I refer to as the programmatic decade. It is where software will enable a lot of lifestyle and other processes to become programmatic. And we'll be able to fulfill these in completely new and different ways. Today, we're going to be talking about virtual reality, which will cross that inflection point where it will become indistinguishable between the human eye when it comes to reality. There are also a whole range of other and new technologies and systems that are going to accelerate that. the Internet of Things, 5G technologies, artificial intelligence, all of those technologies are going to reach major inflection points over the coming decade. And so we will see more transformation this coming decade and disruption perhaps than what we've ever seen before. Now, whilst all of these technologies are very powerful individually, we have to think about the multiplicative effect of what happens when you put some of these technologies together. So for example, what happens when you combine artificial intelligence and cloud and be able to deploy your data in a much more intelligent way than what we have today? What happens when we combine augmented reality, when we combine edge computing, 5G, the Internet of Things, which I'll talk about in a moment? All of a sudden, we're completely rearranging the way with which we experience processes or the way with which we fulfill processes today. And then in all of this, we've got to think about the role that trust is going to play. And what I talk about quite often is that we need to shift our thinking away from the question of who do we trust onto the question of what do we trust. And the what is inclusive of everything from the data to the service provider, through to the devices and the like. And then lastly, quantum computing. When we add quantum computing into the mix, all of a sudden we are able to perform functions and analysis at rates that are just unimaginable today. And so what I would ask you to think about here is that one of the first most significant developments is that we're going to shift from a very centralized view of our architectures, as we have with the cloud, and we've enjoyed the benefits of it. But we're now moving into a distributed architecture defined by edge computing. And here is where we've got to think about the multiplicative effect of what happens when you place latency, processing, and storage much, much closer to the point of consumption or to the venue. So for example, what happens when you start storing digital media, rich media, much closer to a venue for either sport or entertainment? What happens in terms of the experiences that you can then create? Now, when it comes to thinking about the sort of spectrum of opportunities when it comes to extended reality, I'd encourage you to think about these applications in two ways. Firstly, how they'll be applied in terms of business processes, and then how they'll be applied in terms of consumer processes. Now, I'll give you an example on the consumer side. When it comes to gaming today, most of our experiences and technologies are really annexed around a set-top box that has to be within proximity of our monitoring or our television sets. But what happens when you have fifth generation mobile, software-defined networks, and edge computing means that you can virtually do away with consoles. And so gaming is expected to be one of the early applications that we will see massive take up on. Now, on the business side, there's been a whole raft of different use cases, but medical is one that's probably most known to us. And here, we're essentially looking at the capacity to distribute expertise utilizing this technology into areas that today don't have that expertise. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about, from just, Sydney to outback New South Wales. I'm talking about the ability for someone in Perth to be able to either be diagnosing or performing surgery, perhaps, in an undeveloped country such as we have throughout Southeast Asia. But you can see the impact here is anticipated to be, across most industries and for a whole range of different experiences that we can anticipate. So what does this really mean? Now, in my book, I cover about 37 different predictions, but here's some of the ones that I would say for the context of of what we're talking about here in terms of extended reality, these are the ones that I think are going to be really important. The first is that when you start performing surgical procedures and when you start performing mission critical emergency services, then data is going to become very hypercritical. And so the proportion of data that is hypercritical today is in fact quite low. But the more that we become dependent on this to perform all of these sort of services, then the more, hypersensitive that our settings around policies are going to become. And I'm predicting that over the coming decade, we will see data being recognised and legislated, in fact, as an asset. As I mentioned before, when it comes to looking at applications, the way with which we learn today, whether that's in a, primary, secondary, tertiary, or beyond, will profoundly change. And extended reality is what will change education from a, sort of static one-way, type of environment into an experiential, where all of our senses, our touch, sight, sound, and taste, will be able to become immersed in the experience. Now, the other area that I would say is really important to understand from a multiplicative effect is that, as I mentioned before, it's the combination of these technologies that are really going to make these things come to life. And when it comes to connectivity, we've got to think beyond 5G, because the world is about to be washed with tens of thousands of satellites, low orbiting satellites that will deliver high bandwidth capability, connectivity to everyone, to everything and everywhere at low cost. And today there's still 1 billion people on the planet that are not connected. And imagine what it's going to be like adding another billion people when it comes to thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation and the like. And so the way we think about connectivity over the coming sort of 3 to 5 years is also going to fundamentally change the way we think about, we can, for example, experience something virtually and have it 3D printed or on-demand printed in a location that's close to us. So the way we separate these processes is going to become very, very different to how we do them today. Now, what do Australian executives think they're going to be experiencing in 2030? Well, bad news for Elon Musk here and Richard Branson, that recreational travel to outer space is not one of them. But perhaps that same experience could be translated to us through extended virtual or augmented reality. The big area that we're anticipating will profoundly change us is in the area of the sciences, the way with which we think about utilising these technologies to improve our health and welfare. And then lastly, how would you describe your perspectives? Again, we are very, very, very optimistic people when it comes to the use of scientific and technological advances. And it's wonderful to sort of see that people are anticipating the significant improvement that we'll see in our cultural, social, and economic future. So I hope that's given you a sort of good overall, tech tasting, I guess, for the discussion ahead. Here is where you can contact me directly or gain access to my books, which cover in a lot more detail what I've presented to you today. And thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rocky. That was fantastic. And please keep your questions rolling in. Virtual clap for everyone. You can do the thumbs up or the high five emoji. A lot of content in there that I'm keen to unpack through this conversation. One thing that struck me was just the breadth of industries that extended reality will touch, and also some of the feelings from the CEOs that you surveyed, that actually this was relatively far down the list. So I think it was number 8 down the list of technology groups that are most likely to have impact. So I'm keen to unpack that, because we've got 2 entrepreneurs who are joining us now on this panel. Firstly, Anton Andriaco. Anton, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Chris.
And online, Ingo Lau. Ingo is joining us from Hong Kong, where he's doing some brilliant things, and it looks like he's actually in outer space, so that's fantastic too. And we'll pass to Ingo and introduce him in a second. But Anton, I'm keen to start with you. Maybe a super quick 30-second introduction as to who you are and what you're working on. And then we might play a little video from you just to help the audience understand some of the many different use cases that you're currently looking at solving with extended reality.
Sure. Okay. My name's Anton Andriacchio. I'm from today Jumpgate, but Jumpgate is part of a cluster of companies that me and my brother have founded called the Convergent Group. We are primarily interested in the intersection between human interaction and technology. So this spans across all sorts of things, really, from infrastructure visualization through to applications of immersive media, where we're training AFL players, through to contemporary artworks, really trying to understand how humans are engaging with this tech rather than just the productivity gains conversation. So we also do a bit in the post-production space. We've done projects that are on Netflix and film festivals and things. And that's been a really interesting dynamic between these different entities because it allows us to not live and die by the tech wave. We're able to see it in the context of other industries. So.
And I think it's also a fantastic representation of just this very topic, that extended reality can touch almost any industry. And even the fact that, I mean, I lost count in your bio, but I think there's 6 or 7 different companies you're running. It's just a fantastic example of just the myriad of, I guess, opportunities that this cluster that we're calling extended reality opens up. But without further ado, I think we might cue a video where just for a minute, we'll give some examples of use cases that Anton is working on, and we'll do the same for Ingo shortly. Fantastic. So I was trying to count the industries as we were going through that video. I mean, there was AFL, there was a zombie film, which looked awesome. There's a whole, we had property, we had construction, absolute myriad of use cases. I mean, Anton, maybe pick 1 or 2 that you really get excited or are really proud about and talk us through that use case. And also maybe, some reflections from you in terms of some of the use cases. You're working across such a broad spectrum of activity. Like what are the things that you're actually seeing get traction in Australia at the moment?
Sure. Okay. It does appear like there's a myriad of use cases across all these different industries, all these different applications. But what we found is it's the same thing across these industries. Again, it's this human intersection with this tech and what value does that bring? So that's how we reconcile it in our minds, as opposed to getting fragmented in specialization based on this industry with that application over here. We found that the thing that's kept us sustainable against these waves of tech hype and all these other dynamics has been that approach that we are, I don't want to say polymathian, but we like cybersecurity. It actually spans across a lot of industries in this way. So some of the areas, I mean, it's interesting looking at that cross-section because some of those were from 2014, some of those were from 2020. And it's very hard to look at this tech without also caveating at what point in time we're doing that project. So to speak frankly about now, we're working on a couple of really exciting projects. We've got one which is a virtual stroke protocol training project for regional hospitals. It's being rolled out nationally at the moment. It's part of a trial with the University of Newcastle. We're working on projects with AFL players. The high performance space is really interesting for us from a VR perspective because the experiential and spatial awareness side of things is really cool. I'm really excited about some of the contemporary artworks that we're involved in. That's been one of the big barriers we've found with this tech. We can make things faster and better and more pixel ranges and things like that. But there's a lot of content that is still grappling with what is the language of VR. It's not the same as film from a storytelling perspective. I mean, even things like montage are completely different. So those two domains, the training side, the high performance side, and the contemporary art side are really interesting fields for us.
Awesome. Now, you heard from Rocky a couple of the macro themes that we look at, or certainly futurists look at and think have the potential to really catalyze extended reality. One of them was, edge computing. Another was that you'd be very familiar with being in Adelaide, satellites and ubiquity of data. I'm interested in the comment you just made then when you're talking about, the difference between 2014 propositions versus 2020 propositions. Some of the comments that came through in the conversation were a little bit of almost pessimism, people saying, oh, AR, VR, extended reality, it's been around since the 80s, like, why now? Like, maybe if you could sort of talk through, do you agree with some of the catalyst insights that Rocky came up with? And, why is now the time, if it is the time, for extended reality?
I'm not sure it is the time. I'm not pessimistic, but I've got a bit of a reputation for being contrarian with VR AR. It has been around for a long time and it's going to be around in the future. And the way we look at this is we get into trouble when we look at the tech, when we start with the tech, because it can be a solution looking for a problem, which is so much of the tech world nowadays. It's, build it and they will come, or make it and they will watch. And from our perspective, that hasn't really worked. What's been successful for us has been starting with the people and building around what they're doing. The problem with that is it's not scalable from a tech perspective or from a startup perspective. But an example I'll give is AFL training, football training. When we went in, we had a very simple tech sell. It was, they're all fit, they're all fast, but they've got limited time on the park. So you put them in a VR headset and we can give them extra time. And very easy to sell if you do that. But the problem was we then had to deliver on that. And all these problems started to emerge, like they've never learned in VR before. There's a problem with information saturation. If they're interested in the tech, the demand goes up pretty rapidly. So you need to quench the insatiable appetites of some players, and then others don't want to use it at all. So we found all of these other layered problems that came into play. So our approach was then to flip it and go, okay, well, rather than see VR as the sell, let's start with what the coaches are having trouble with and build around them, treat it as a visualization tool. And by inflecting it like that, it gave us this mode where rather than just starting with VR or AR or experiential media or all the other tech that we're using, we actually start with the relationships and the human side of interacting with it, because that was the problem that needed to be solved. I mean, we could do a lot of these things technically, but it wasn't working. And that's to talk about now. We're in a really interesting period now because the hype has very much fallen off. It's cooled off. So, I mean, 2015, 16, 17, there was a lot of investment in the space, and there still is investment, but the social engagement with it, I mean, we were on the front lines of so many community engagement days or activations where it was novel, and then it became very uncool very quickly, which has been great because it's now provides us with time and space to actually have better conversations about what we're actually doing. So
yeah, I definitely want to come back to this question in terms of mainstream adoption, because I think, it's a really interesting conversation around how the community, the industry, support the development in these spaces. But I think one thing that would be interesting for you to unpack a little bit for the group would be around just the production process, and namely the production costs. I mean, it strikes me as some of these brilliant work you've done. I mean, I see you at the back of Lot 14. You've often got a little bit of bags under your eyes. Yeah, I know your team work incredibly hard, but it strikes me as potentially some work is one, very labor intensive, and two, does it scale well? Like, can you maybe talk about, are you seeing advancements in the production capability of some of this technology that is going to bring that barrier to entry or make some of this technology more scalable? Because ultimately, going back to Rocky's point, widestream adoption means, yes, there's a lot more people working on it, but potentially it also means that the costs of producing this content are coming down significantly as well.
And they have come down significantly. I mean, in the early days, we were strapping GoPros together, and to be honest, VR's been around for decades. So this is the early days of this wave. But then the cameras started coming out, and they were very expensive, 20, 30, 50,000. Now the cameras are significantly better and closer to 5,000. So there are a lot of, there's been downward pressure on a lot of the price associated with the filming gear. We tend to have two domains. One is on the production side, or three domains. One's on the production side, which is running around with cameras. One's on the post side, which is visual effects and all of the evolutions that are happening in that space. But the third, which we're really excited about, is the game engine side of things. So we do a lot of work with Unreal and Unity, and this gives us more flexibility to design interactive experiences. So when you film something, you've got to stage it, well, to an extent. You film it and then it's there. In a game engine, we can bring randomness, we can bring the AI that's available a lot easier now into these different experiences, and that's making it a lot more scalable and exciting for us.
And great segue, speaking of gaming, to Ingo. I mean, we just saw in Rocky's presentation, and it'd probably be no surprise that gaming, like in many industries, has been a really lead adopter and is embracing this technology. Ingo, I'll introduce you. Ingo Lau, so founder of a company called Mycology, based in Hong Kong. We had a look around the world at entrepreneurs that were really applying novel applications of extended reality, and Ingo's name came up very quickly. He's won a multitude of awards, and he's really cemented a reputation for taking some elements of the gaming community to solve modern real-world problems. So, Ingo, I'd love you to just briefly introduce yourself, and then, like Anton, we'll play a short video that you've put forward explaining some of your work.
Sure. Well, I am Ingo from Mycology Limited. Well, I came from a gaming background, so I have over 10 years experience of making games. Then we realized with this gaming experience and game engines, we can fuse AR, VR with different types of visualization solutions. Because in the reality, like there are so many graphs, there are so many different 2D maps or 2D information that needs to be evaluated. And it's very hard for the current, let's say you browse the World Wide Web and you go to a 2D map, and not many people are able to relocate problems very quickly, especially when there are intersections, there are overlays, there are slope and everything. And with extended realities, everything is displayed in the 3D worlds, and it helps people to locate problems and communicate much better. Because most of the time, for a manager to look for a problem, they need to look for IT professional or professional people who can read all those graphs, and it takes a lot of time to evaluate what's happening with only 2D informations. So our solution are mainly focused on solving these visualization problems. So help them to communicate better, to execute the decision much faster. And our client include the Hong Kong Airport and some of the geographic company. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ingo. We might cue the video just to show off some of your work and set the scene.
So I'll explain along with the video. This is one of the project we did for the Hong Kong Airport. It's called the borehole wheeler. You see the little red dots there is called the borehole. It's store underground soil informations. They are normally displayed in 2D 2D documents, PDF in PDF format, which is totally not readable for a normal human. And we import this data into 3D visualizations maps, which you can see these data are connected and displaying soil information. You can check the soil directly from here. And then if you dive into the borehole wheel, which will be shown later on, you can actually see exactly what the soil underground, the specific location is. You can change the soil, the material layer, make adjustment, and you no longer have to look at all the 2D PDF files and everything. And this application doesn't only apply for soil, it's also apply for any type of underground informations. This is another type of underground information wheeler, which is for the underground water pipe, which in normal 2D wheel, there's no depth. So you have no idea how deep the water pipe are. In 3D world, this problem is completely solved, and you can see exactly where the water pipes are located. Because normally you have no idea, even look at the 2D map, when you go on the actual ground and check the map, you have no idea where those are located. And for the yellow spot, it's actually the bird pipe simulations. So you know exactly what valve to close. The red dots are the valve you need to close to stop the water from bursting out of the pipes. And the system is actually synchronized through the GPS system within AR devices, which you go around the airport and then you take a look at the ground. You will know exactly what's happening underground and where the things are located. They are all synchronized with a GPS location system. So this is not just a augmented reality system. It's a GPS-based AR system which you can mark, locate things, and check up stuff regularly without digging up the ground.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ingo. So, we're still going very good. Now we've got live cars, or are we done? Oh, very good.
Yeah, there are more coming, but if you have less time, you can skip those if you want to.
Okay. So very clearly, Ingo working on a whole bunch of very interesting propositions. I particularly like the augmented reality of the water pipes. I think it's next generation dial before you dig, which is pretty cool. Ingo, I would love you to give us a bit of global context to extended reality. I mean, we've just heard from Anton some of the Australian use cases that are starting to get more widespread adoption. Talk to us about some of the work that you're doing. Are you seeing companies, government, infrastructure providers embrace extended reality, whether that be AR, VR, or is it still a challenge to get mainstream adoption of some of the technology that you're working on?
I think it's a massive growth right now for the AR and VR. They are getting matured. As you said earlier, the tech out there is for a really long period of time. But however, for it to get mature, I think it's recently. Because for the AR system, for example, the AR that we are doing, it requires a really accurate GPS location. But with 5G, actually the GPS become more accurate. So the AR and positioning become much better. And because some of the water pipe bursts, they are actually detected from an IoT devices through the water pipe. So with IoT, 5Gs, and AR, they become a total solution in global. Like you can visualize everything and monitor everything in a 3D virtual world, which reflect the real world completely, like 100%. I call it a digital twin. One of the projects I did for the airport is called the automated robot warehouse. It actually works this way. Basically, they have tough time trying to make a decision on how robotic robot auto AGV runs in a warehouse, and they took a very long period of time working for the 2D maps, all the drafts, and all those informations. And then we did the simulation system, which accurately tells them how the AGV works and how the racks are positioned. And with that kind of information, they can make the decision very quickly. Like can move around and know exactly without going through the real world case. Like they don't have to deploy the robot to see what happens. And then we integrate the VR system as well, so they can know exactly what's happening before even diving into making the hardware. And in the end, it become a distribution system. It synchronizes all the position or all the AGV position data with IoT devices located inside the system. So basically, you can dive into a VR world and extended reality world, which are replicating the real world completely. And without any CCTVs, you no longer have to look at all the CCTVs and all the camera, and you can ignore all the blind spot. And I think it's a very good technology for the upcoming smart cities, or even with all the AI trackings and all these data collecting devices, it becomes a much better display information methodology for global. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ingo. I'm interested to pick up and ask you about one of the comments that Anton made just before. I mean, there's no doubt, and I mean, even some of the examples that you were giving, 1,000 odd device rollouts, like big scale, certainly by, South Australian standards, $200 billion a year industry, extended reality in the next few years. So we're talking big money. But one of the comments that Anton made around really, this dynamic of the traditional, at least the entrepreneurial industry, going in with a solution and not necessarily knowing the problem. I'm really interested in the dynamic that you're seeing in the market, particularly in Asia, and whether, when you're having conversations around some of these different potential, whether it's in construction or it's in, water leakage or whatever the use case is, are you finding that the buyer can think through the problem that AR, VR, one of these technologies could potentially solve? Or is it very much, you know, still in the infancy of the market where you're having to go in and really help these organizations understand, well, what are the problems I need to solve and what is the technology that makes the most sense?
Well, I think we need to guide them and actually them how all this system works. Because, for example, for Hong Kong, most of the government, they are using some really older technologies. They may not understand how this technology actually helps them. So we have to make more PWs and prototypes to show them, proof of concepts to show them how it works and how it actually helps them. Because most of the time, it requires not only the AR. For example, in our case, we need accurate GPS system. We need a 3D visualization platform, which is located in the HQ. It's a total solution, not just the AR itself. So we have to deploy the whole thing in a full-scale solution that solves the major problem, which is they have to dig up the ground and they have to communicate between the HQ and the investigation team, which they just using phone, and you know it's very hard to communicate when, hey, I'm looking at that window, where am I? And then the headquarters manager asks, what window? I don't know. There are like 10,000 windows out there. So we are trying to solve this communication problem to help them save lives or even reduce lots of costs in communications.
Very good. And we've had a super quick question. Someone loves the tech and wants you to bring it to Australia. Is that on the cards?
Well, yeah, of course. We are actually exploring more options in overseas because our solutions are actually still on testing phase for the airport. Airport is actually one of the testing purpose we are doing right now because we want to make sure it works perfectly for the case first. It's you know, in airport, it's actually a really small scale of city. It's like a small scale of Hong Kong, so it's a very good place for us to test our technologies. Yeah.
So quick segue. I mean, we've had a couple of questions come through. It seems like there are a lot of people on this call that are working across a whole bunch of different industries. We've had HR, manufacturing, mining, medicine, a whole bunch of you know, different use cases. And the common theme or the variant of the question is, you know, when is this going to become a reality in my industry, and when will adoption become more mainstream? So I'm going to maybe pick, or rapid fire, or maybe even the audience, you can yell out an industry and I'll repeat it. And I want Anton and Ingo, you to just pick, you know, is it 1, 3, 5, 10, 50 years? Okay, so anyone want to yell an industry? Don't all yell at once. Okay, mining.
Now, but in what domain? It's definitely being rolled out in a lot of applications, from safety training through to, we do a lot of remote site visits now. So we're looking at how we can bring sites to people rather than people to sites. However, widespread adoption is still some time away. The biggest issue with construction and mining really is that they're more used to unstructured information. People are still very important.
And Ingo, your view?
Well, I'm basically on the same page as Anton, because it really depends on what sector of the mining field is. If it's, for example, for VR training, I think it's very mature. It can be deployed now. But if you are looking for like a digital twin solution which synchronize, for example, where the workers are located, where everything, you need a lot of sensors, you need other supplementary hardware to help that out. So it may take a little bit longer to implement. But I think there are many companies, for example, AI tracking or safety helmet, they are doing similar things. What you have to do is combine all this technology together, and then we can combine full into extended realities. I think it will work in about 3-4 years. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do 2 more, and I'm going to make them pick a number instead of give a long answer. Anyone else want to yell at an industry? Health and medical. So,
being used in pain management currently, but I find it hard to answer with a definitive number because widespread adoption, how would you define
this is the role of a futurist. We say what's going to happen in the future.
I think adoption right now is 0.5 out of 10. I think it'll be maybe 5-10 years before it kind of tapers off and hits its maximum potential adoption. So.
Awesome. Okay. And any views from you, Ingo?
Yeah, I think it's 5 years at least, really, for that, for really mature adoptions. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we've had a couple of questions come through online, which I might palm to. And to paraphrase, the conversation tangent really is around the less positive or the potential for, I guess, ethical considerations around some of this technology. And the question that was raised was specifically around defence. We've seen defence in the last 5 years start to embrace some of the extended reality technology. Anton, I know that you've been quoted as saying a couple of times, that we really need to understand both the positive and the potential, challenges around some of new tech. Can you maybe talk to me a little bit around some of the applications for extended reality into industries where you think we're going to start to butt up against ethical or other issues? And, does that keep you awake at night? We've obviously seen a whole movement in particularly Silicon Valley around ethical AI. Comments, thoughts, observations?
Short answer. I'm terrified by all of what's going on. I think there's I don't think we're even close to having the right level of conversation about this yet, culturally, socially. As an example of something a few years ago, and I'll step away from VR just for the sake of keeping it abstract. I remember going to a thought leaders lunch about the Facebook economy. It's in 2017. And the hypothesis was the more connected we are, the better the world will be, which fast forward a few years definitely is not an a priori assumption that we should really just run with. So with VR, a big concern I've had is what happens when we become saturated with this tech. Do we become desensitized to this technology like we have with every other piece of media, whether it's the radio or film or TV? I'm not necessarily negative about these things. I do have a lot of hope for what we can do with this, but an example being when the UN did their first VR work, Clouds over Sidra, back in 2015, it was spectacular seeing people respond to it. It brought them into that world. It was quoted in many film festivals, in all the panels, as being the empathy engine. That's what VR is. The problem is, fast forward a few years and the UN produces a lot of this content and no one's really watching it. So I worry about once mainstream adoption happens, what does it look like then? I think the second thing is that our phones have changed our behavior. We've got these dopamine dispensers in our pocket. And if we are really just going for mainstream adoption and we're working with gaming and there's all this potential, how does that change how we interact? And again, it could be great, but I'm not convinced that it necessarily will be. I'm more interested in the pathway of how we get there. And that's why we do a lot of work with the arts. That's why we do a lot of work with trying to understand what are the right applications from our perspective. And I think the pressure of scalability and the pressure of finance and the pressure of a lot of these things can drive a certain conversation that doesn't leave room for these sorts of things. So yeah.
Now, Ingo, to segue, we've got more than half of the people on the call and in the room today are entrepreneurs thinking about, future possibility. Maybe pick, if we're talking, short term, next 3 to 5 years, what's one use case that you're really excited about extended reality having the potential to solve, and potentially an area that you're not seeing either too much momentum or you're seeing as a big opportunity for entrepreneurs to roll up their sleeves and really make a difference?
Well, I think for the constructions or property management, I think AR and VR can do a lot in that sector in the coming 2-3 years. Because if you look into, they are building information model. They are emerging really quickly lately. For example, like Revit models. And people are trying to synchronize their construction progress with live 3D model, the BIM model. And I believe with that, we can build some really great AR and VR. We combines the reality and display information in a much better and more efficient way. Because right now, the BIM model is really heavy right now. Like it creates a problem because the BIM model is the polygons and the vertex, they are actually programmed in a different way compared to the normal 3D model you build. So the current hardware sometimes have a hard time to trying to render those information. However, with the hardware coming, become more stronger and stronger, and there are both better automation of the game engine as well. There are many game engines actually doing more automation in this field. So I believe the AR and VR will work a lot better in that sector in the coming 2-3 years. And I think in about 5 to 10 years, I believe that the data collections from AI and IoT, they will become even more mature. So I think they can even capture life. For example, they can capture a human with AI, or even capture human motion with AI, and they can synchronize the motions and everything in a virtual world or even in AR world. So you don't actually have to be there to maybe see a friend or do some action or even play a game with other people, but it may take a little longer. And there are more hand trackings and bone tracking devices, which are really great for VR devices. So I think in the coming years, with the VR gear becoming more portable and more advanced, I believe there will be a much better potential for VR sports or and everything. Yeah.
Thanks, Ingo. Certainly sounds exciting. VR sports. I'm bad enough at normal sports. I'm not sure how I'd go in VR. Anton, I'm going to ask you the same question, but before I do, we're about to open to questions. So get them ready online, throw them in. Anyone in the room, get your questions ready. I hope that your answer about exciting future is something related to zombie videos that you showed just before, because that looked amazing. But same question to you, Anton. Opportunity that you think is ripe to solve and would have an impact on the world.
Okay. The zombie games, there's lots of those in VR. You can go play them right now. I think I'm excited by this principle of bringing places to people rather than people to places. I think it's a way of being able to kind of connect in a different way. And I think that's a real value proposition from a VR perspective. From an AR perspective, look, there are so many different use cases, and we're pursuing seriously about 6 at the moment, particularly in the construction and the mining industry, but also this stroke protocol training project that I mentioned before, which is how do we bring to regional communities and regional centers a lot of the engagement with different methodologies and different ways of learning and connecting worlds that we otherwise wouldn't be able to. So that's what I'm really excited about. And I'm, again, really excited about the contemporary art and the filmmaking side of things, because that to me has been a more interesting frontier. Seeing new frontiers at Sundance in particular, what the Adelaide Film Festival has done, shameless plug again, but seeing how conceptual thinkers are looking at this as a canvas and going, what's possible, that to me has been, well, that's actually taught us a lot. Working with contemporary artists has taught us a lot about language, how we can engage with this and what we can actually do with it in terms of its potential. So yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, we might open for some questions. Any in the room? Just throw your hand up.
What do you think is the use case for future transportation? Because there's a lot happening in the way of cars that drive automatically, and but also efficiency of infrastructure. How do you see that can help in that area?
Don't know. One thing I like saying is, I used to have so much conviction about where this was going, but every big idea I had turned out to be somewhat wrong. It's things are changing so quickly that I'm very wary of speculating too far out. Could we be in self-driving cars with VR headsets on, relaxing? Maybe. Could the AR be enhancing how we drive? Maybe. I can envisage worlds where that plays, but also a big thing that we've learned from is, we built a 360 live streaming platform with the AFL, and it was launched at about the same time that the mobile app was launched. The amount that everyone's using that app compared to the VR headset is incredible. So like, just because we can doesn't mean I think people necessarily will. And I'm very wary of having too much conviction on that. So
Ingo, have you got any comments on transport? We cut off your video while you were showing a nice augmented reality version of a car model.
There is a similar use case, but it's not necessarily in VR, but more like a simulation system for crowd control. For example, if you want to adjust the traffic light and test how crowded the traffic is, you can do it in the extended reality world without going through actually tuning in the real world. And it can synchronize data from AI devices as well. This is actually a concept that I have been talking about from some of our clients. It's just a concept really. So basically what they do is they try to capture real life the car data through the AI devices. They recognize the car models, and then they synchronize the position and live data and put it inside the extended realities. So it becomes a really live digital twin system, and then you can position yourself in extended reality exactly like what's happening in the other part of the world. And that's a concept they're working on. However, I think it might take a little bit longer to implement that because the AI tracking and everything needs to be enhanced more in the future.
Okay, we've got time for one or two more questions. Any in the room, Daesh? No?
So I guess from where I'm sitting, we're heading towards an autonomous future. And that autonomous future may look a little bit more like autonomy that is working with us as opposed to working on its own, so augmented autonomy. I guess I'm looking for a comment as to what opportunity or how important do you think XR or AR may be in helping people interact with those kind of autonomous futures?
You can go first. I went first last time.
Okay. Well, I believe the most important for that to dive in the future is instead of the immersive experience, it's more like how to help people to communicate between each other. Like the problem of some of the client facing is their information that is very hard to evaluate in real world. They are, like I said, they are based on 2D flat data. And what we are browsing, we call it the World Wide Web. They're all in 2D. And I believe extended reality is a step to the 3D spatial web systems, which people were talking about earlier, I think 2019. And it's actually world that connect people, AI, 5G, IoT, and everything. And everything can be displayed in a spatial web system, which is not only AR and VR, but in a even more advanced way. You are actually seeing the same thing like in real life, even you're in a different part of the world. And I believe that's how we have the futures. Yeah.
I'd say it's got a big role to play. I agree with the proposition that we're heading towards an autonomous future and automated future in a lot of ways. I'd argue that the way humans think is very different to computers. So humans will indelibly be involved. And this idea of transhumanism, of what are humans of the future with augmentation, will require us to have a way of augmenting our experience and how we interface with the world too. So how do we interface with data? I'm not convinced it's just more data will lead to better solutions. It's a Laplacian kind of determinism thing of, oh, more data and more computation, it's all going to be great. I think there's going to be a role for humans to be able to deal with complex problem solving in particular, and how we play with that data in an increasingly complex world. I think it's not that far away, and XR is going to be a massive part of that. Everyone points to the what was it, Tom Cruise movie with the Minority Effect, how he's interfacing with that computer. I don't think it will necessarily be like that. I think with like how we're evolving through even mobile technology now is determining, well, showing a certain trajectory that we will still engage with tech in somewhat traditional ways. I don't think there's going to be massive leaps very quickly, but I think already it's starting to seep into how we're working, whether it's with Fitbits or a lot of consumer-facing tech.
Great. Okay. Well, is there any final questions? If not, please join me in thanking Ingo and Anton. And we're going to cue a rapturous applause. And for everyone in the room and also online, this is part of a rolling series that we run on the Futurist here. We've had some fantastic conversations, future of transport, future of extended reality and others. So if you haven't already, just jump on the website or on Twitter to get a download of the 500 plus events that we're running every year. And love to see some more of you for future conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.